Hello and welcome back to the studio of the first painting of 2025. Now, traditionally we've all just gone through a period of something called New Year's resolutions. I did forget what I was going to say. New Year's resolutions, where we vow to do something. We said, oh, I've always wanted to do it and this is the year I'm going to do it. And that New Year's resolution is learning to paint. Okay, and so many times we make these resolutions and then you think, where do I start? So I thought I'll do a little painting for you today, which I think would give you maybe a good jumping on point. Now, don't think this is too complicated because I'm going to try and simplify the whole process down to something very simple. And I hope I'm going to produce a little painting for you here, which I think that you think, well, I could have a go at that. I could do something really nice with it. So before we get sort of too tangled up in all the technical stuff, let's have a look at the reference. And as you see, let me hold it there with my thumb. It's a black and white photograph of a local pathway not far from where we live. Now, if you want to start painting black and white, that's one thing, and that's absolutely fine. But the beauty of this is that you can make it anything you want. You can make this a winter, you can make it a summer or a spring. Change it to lovely golds and browns, make it an autumn. This is the perfect template for a beginner to learn. So what season should we paint? I think we're going to do this as a winter scene, but a pastel winter scene. All raring to go. But what's this? A piece of paper? You want to get on with some painting. Brushes, paints, lots of sort of lovely colours sploshed everywhere. But that usually ends up in a bit of a pickle, doesn't it? So I'm going to give you some nice, easy opening sort of parts to your painting. And I'm going to encourage you to learn to do a little bit of a sketch. This sketch will be the blueprint which you use to paint this painting over and over again. And I hope you do paint it several times throughout the year. This will become so familiar to you, this whole painting, but it will be the bedrock upon which you learn to paint. And the first thing I want to do is to simplify this whole thing down into a simple sketch. Now, the first thing is that this is quite a long, narrow painting, or a long, narrow photograph, and I'm on a bit more of a square canvas. So maybe I should think about bringing the sides in just a tiny bit, just a little bit. And I want to think about where this part of my painting is going to sit. Now, this is something which you'll hear me talk about, which is something called the rule of thirds. A third up from the bottom and a third in from the side, and that point there is where you have a focal point. It's a hot spot, and your eye will travel along the fence and it will look at that tree before it moves on. The horizon line is just there. So we need to divide up our drawing into some sections first of all, and this is a really key principle. Once you can get this little sketch done, you'll be able to keep this line drawing and then reuse it time and again. So first things first, let's work out roughly a third. So if I go about a third the way across and draw a little bit of a line, about another third the way across, that's a bit of a fat third, isn't it? There you go. So roughly, we're talking rough thirds here. About a third the way across there. So your sketch doesn't have to be anything too fancy. That's not quite a complete third, is it? Maybe that's a little bit out of line, but you've got the gist of it. So now we know where the thirds are. The first third is going to be our tree. So let's put the tree here. That's it. And again, this doesn't have to be too complicated. It literally just has to be the rough sort of size and shape for this tree. There we go, a bit like that. There's two trunks in there, so there it is. Our first part of the drawing done. A tree on the third point here. Now, the horizon line, that's at about a third as well, isn't it? So maybe just a little bit higher. Just a little bit higher than that, because this line of the fence here is going to be coming through. There's that level. Pretty much level, isn't it? Level enough. So that's going to be the horizon line. And then we have this line, which is the fence. And this takes us to that third point again. So we know that's at a little bit of an angle. So we're going to go a little bit higher there. We're going to let it drop down to the right. It drops down quite a bit, doesn't it? There we go. We're going to have some fence posts. There's one not far from the tree. There's a fence post just there. A little bit further along, another one just there. Another one just there, a little bit lower than the horizon lines. Look at the gaps as well, look. Shorter, longer, longer, longest. Longer, longer, longest. So I have to put my next post will have to go in about there, I think. This won't be right. You see, so already we're starting to discover things about this little painting we're going to be doing. We're starting to figure out the proportions. See how that disappears to nothing in the distance? So that's where we go to. We go to nothing. That's it. Disappears. And again, these little posts in the distance, look how faint they get. They almost completely disappear. So once again, this little drawing is going to be the template which we rely upon to do all of our paintings. So it's worth getting it right. I think I'm pretty pleased with that. So we've got tree, fence. Now, let's have a look at this. This is the pathway. Look how steep that line is there. It's almost straight down. And it goes to, well, almost halfway across my painting. So let's think about adding that in next. We want a line that goes almost straight down. There we go. Almost straight down. The other one's going to go across, past the tree, so over towards here, under the tree, and at least halfway along my tree. There we go, at least halfway. And again, every time I draw something, I look at my photograph and I look back at my drawing, and I make a little bit of a mental note. This is a nice little bit of vegetation, looks like, coming through the centre here. And again, goes to nothing, disappears, it gets wider as it gets towards us. I look at these proportions, see that lovely long wedge there? That's that wedge there, it's underneath these fence posts. There's going to be a little bit of vegetation there, maybe a little bank. Let's just drop that a bit in like that. And over here maybe we're going to have some grasses. I might not have this. I might not have this being quite so heavy. I might just have that just more like a little hedge there and open this side up. Again, you just make the decision as you're painting. But so far I'm just going to put it in as a little bit of a hedge. There we go. So there's a hedge. And the last thing, a couple of nice tree shapes here. Look at the sizes, they're not very big, are they? Look how faint they are as well. So again, you're starting to educate your eyes. You're starting to look at the shape of things. You're starting to see the proportions, the shapes, and the sizes of things. And these are the lessons which will stand you in good stead as you go through your hobby of being a painter and an artist. So there we go. What do you think? Was that easy? Not bad. What I'll do is I'll make both this reference photograph and this sketch available, and I will put it on my Pixabay page so you can download this and keep this. But I do suggest you maybe start off by getting the photograph from Pixabay and doing your own sketch, and then compare it to mine and see if it's any good. I think now we have something which we can work with on a canvas. Incidentally, if you do make any mistakes or any little pickles, you can always rub this out. But don't worry, you'll still be able to do that when you're back on your canvas as well. So now we have our little line drawing. All we have to do is draw that onto our canvas. But hang on just a moment, because the chances are you'll be sitting looking at a white canvas, and my one clearly isn't white. There's a reason for that. You see, the world around us isn't actually painted or exists on a white background, unless you live in Antarctica, of course, which might be fairly white. The world around us is greys and blues and greens, different tones. So trying to paint on a white canvas causes lots of problems. We see everything just far too bright, and it's not really like that. But what we can do is we can actually tone our canvases. In other words, we can give it a little bit of a background colour. Now in this case I'm using buff titanium white, which is a warm colour. I want a warm winter scene, and this will tone my canvas and give the whole painting a nice warm feel. If I paint on a grey canvas, for instance, this painting will appear to be much sort of cooler, almost cold. And if I was paint on a blue canvas, well, of course that would really look chilly. So sometimes having a coloured canvas is a real advantage. But you decide. Have a go at painting on white if that's all you've got, but I think you might find this is going to be more of a challenge if you do. If you want to tone your canvas, get some white acrylic paint and a little dash of yellow ochre, maybe a little smidge of red too, and make yourself a nice warm biscuit colour. That's the sort of buff colour that I've got on my canvas. And if you want a grey canvas for future paintings, then white with a little tiny speck of black, of course, will make you grey. It could be gesso or acrylic, both work well. But remember, it needs to be completely dry before you can use oils. So having sorted out the colour of our canvas, it's now a case of just transferring this little sketch onto the canvas. As you can see, I just need to know exactly where this point is in my painting, this hot spot. So it's about a third up from the bottom and about a third in from the side. So somewhere around about here is my tree. I'll do a little bit of time lapse whilst I put this on to my canvas. So there's my little sketch all ready to go, and finally we can start adding some paint to our canvas. Now I'm painting with oil paint, and a brand I often use is this one, which is Bob Ross brand, and this is something called liquid white. Now this means I'm going to cover my entire canvas with a very, very thin coat of the liquid white colour. What this does is it gives me sort of a sort of slippery background that I can then add colour to, and I can blend them out. Particularly for a soft pastel style of painting like this. I want to be able to blend colours and have them blend gently one into another. Now, you might think, so, well, if I'm going to cover this in white paint, then what was the point of having that yellow background, this sort of beige colour? The reason why it is important is because the liquid white is applied very sparingly, just a thin coat, and you'll still see a little bit of this yellowness grinning through. It's subtle, but if you do the same painting with grey, you'll get a subtle grey tone to your painting. The key here is that word, subtlety. Not looking for bold, striking colours, which is the reason why I chose a winter scene for you to practice with, because the range of colours is more limited. You don't have lots of big changes and contrast between lots of yellows and white greens and blues. Here we've got a muted palette. So let's have a quick look at that. Oh, reach behind me and have a quick look. So I've got obviously titanium white, a little phthalo blue and some alizarin crimson, which will make me a lovely soft lavender colour, a hint of black if I want to grey things down, some burnt sienna if I want to make some nice sort of warm reddish orange tones, and a little touch of Indian yellow, which I can mix with the burnt sienna to make some nice sort of oranges, or I can mix a little touch of this with some titanium white to make sort of a yellow sort of more sort of ochre grass sort of colour. But you'll see as I go on with my painting. So this is it, a very, very limited number of colours. Let's start off by mixing up a little bit of alizarin crimson and some phthalo blue, and I want a lavender tone. So not too heavy on the blue, it's very strong, about 5 parts alizarin crimson. I'll mix that up and then we'll put some on our canvas. But first I should apply the liquid white. I nearly missed that step out, so let's do that first. So here's my liquid white, and I keep it in a little airtight pot, which is easy to seal up because I actually keep this in the freezer. That's right, If you store oil paint in a freezer, it stops it drying out, and all that happens is this just becomes sort of a bit stiff. Once it reaches room temperature again, it goes back to being an oil paint. And I've got a very old landscape 1-inch brush. You can see it looks like whipped cream. And I'm going to just apply a very small amount to my painting and just scrub it in. Now, as I mentioned, the paint is applied very thinly at this stage, so you'll see my line drawing starts to fade out a little bit. It's a bit like it's on a foggy day, but the beauty here is that you can actually still see the drawing through liquid white, and as we add colour to it, it's to remind us where that is in our painting. But you can also see there's that yellowness still grinning through. So I'll add a thin even coat of liquid white over the entire surface of my canvas, and just to make sure I don't overdo it, I'll do a little thing called a fingertip test, which is where I touch the canvas and look at my fingertips, and that's what I want to see, a nice even fingerprint. That's a bit on the thin side, so let's add that much all over my canvas. So there we are. My canvas, which is 12 by 16, is now got a thin even coat of Bob Ross liquid white covering the entire surface. Now, as I mentioned, this is to aid the application of colours. You can still see my tree, but now I can put, say, a very pale lavender colour on here, and instead of it just sticking straight to the canvas, it's now got a layer of liquid white, and that means that the colours will be able to blend and becomes nice and soft. If you went onto a dry canvas, the colour would stick. It would grab the canvas and it would be very hard to get a nice soft blend. You might end up with hard edges. This way, I can guarantee I'll be able to do a nice soft sort of pastel scene without too much trouble. Now, you can still see my tree is there, but if you lose it, you can just rub your brush over the painting and it's all still there. So, if it just disappears a little bit, it's actually more easy to see when you're sitting in front of the canvas, but I'll just push a little of this liquid white out of the way so you can still see the basic outline of my painting. Now then, let's mix up some of that lavender colour. The lavender colour I'm going to make is about 5 parts of alizarin crimson to 1 part of blue, approximately. So it's very much a sort of a try it out sort of colour. There's the alizarin crimson, and I'll take a little bit of blue, and you only really know when you've got the right colour by actually mixing it up on the palette. Now, you can do a slightly more blue lavender, or you can go for a more sort of crimson lavender, or somewhere in between the two. It's sort of a nice neutral lavender, sort of a more sort of purpley sort of colour. I often remind myself that once I've done the initial blend of colours, give them an extra couple of flips in case there's a little bit of blue sneaking around, like that bit. It can really kind of get you in trouble. Now then, what do we think? That's a lovely lavender colour, but boy, it's strong, isn't it? And it's not going to be much good for a pastel painting, so let's put some to one side, take out a little bit of white, and stir that up on the same spot. As you see, you start to see our lavender colour a little bit more. Now, as I say, you can vary this colour a little bit. You can put a hint more blue in it if you wish, or you can just carry on using it as it is. And we're going to apply this to our painting, but remember, of course, there's liquid white on the painting already, so this colour could change again a little bit. I want to use this brush, which has obviously got some liquid white already on it. And if you think it's got a bit too much liquid white on there, you can always take some off. But I think I'm going to try it with the colours on the palette and a little bit of liquid white in my brush, because as I say, I want my colour to look really pastel. Now, there's a little row of trees back in there, and I want that to look really kind of soft back there. So I'm going to start with my colours up here in the corners first. because if it's too strong, I prefer it to be too strong there than too strong sort of really in a vital point of my painting. Now, the other thing we haven't really touched on yet is where is the light coming from in the painting? And this is essential really, because if the light's coming over my shoulder, it means that this whole painting would be brightly lit. If the light is coming from one side, then maybe this side would be brighter and it would be casting shadows across the ground in this direction. Conversely, if it was bright on this side, then you might see a lovely shadow of the tree across the ground. For my particular painting, the light is strongly to the left and quite low on the horizon line. Being winter time, it's going to be a little bit lower. So this is the side which I'm going to have a little bit more in shadow, and this side is going to be a little brighter. And as I go across here, I'm going to let the colour run out. I want this lovely sort of soft, almost biscuit yellow colour to come grinning through a little bit. And we have trees back in here as well. I could add more colour to my sky. So I could take a little bit more colour for that. I could even take some of my original colour, just a little bit, and just vary my colours. See? So this is a way of painting which you can evolve a work gently, bit by bit. You can have these little streaks of light through here. Working with oil paint is, I think, one of the absolute pleasures of painting, is that they dry slowly. You have time to sit back and think about it. You can blend them out. You can come back in and have a little play with them. And I know that for many people who might be starting painting as a hobby, you'll be tempted to use maybe watercolour, because that seems to be a fairly friendly sounding medium, doesn't it? And it is. It's delightful to use, but it's not very fixable sometimes. You can fix watercolours if they go a little bit pear-shaped, but oils has it for me in terms of its absolute beginner-friendly nature, because it dries so slowly. So let's put a little bit more on my brush. Maybe you could just take some little clouds through here. Look at that. Wow. Just wiggle your brush through there. Brush it out gently, and suddenly you've got a cloud. Let's do that again. That was a lot of fun, wasn't it? I think I just got to wiggle that through there. Oh, look at that. Now then, you also saw that when I did that, let's dry my brush off on a piece of paper towel. Let's knock some of that off. Now, if you go back through here, you can reveal some of that lovely yellow colour again. So this is where the advantage of having some yellow ochre on our painting comes into play. One of my sky colours is already on there. I just reveal or cover up the bits that I want. Once I'm happy, I can take the side of my brush very gently and just brush across, smooth out any brush marks. So you see, this is a way of creating a very nice, simple little background sky, full of energy and lovely colours, without too much stress. I think I might have to do a bit more of this. You can play with this till your heart's content, but I think it's time we moved on and decided what we're going to do with these background trees. Let's look at our reference photograph again. Here you can see these background trees fading almost to nothing here, and even though this is done when the trees are actually in leaf, the trees still have a similar sort of look when it's a midwinter scene. In other words, from a distance you can still see the outline of the trees. They just might be a little bit more sort of holy. You can see a bit more of the background sky through it. So we want to be able to put in the impression of some trees away off in the distance, but without any detail. And for this, one of my favourite brushes is a fan brush, particularly one that looks a bit like that. These are well worn. In fact, this one here has been I've been a bit chopped about with a pair of scissors, but these are the sorts of brushes which could be your absolute best friends when you're just looking to do the impression of something without having to get into too much detail. You just want to use the brush literally and press it into the painting and create just the look of some nice distant trees. And we can need a colour that's only just slightly darker than the background. As you saw from that photograph, we want these to look like they're almost sinking away into the distance. So let's look at our palette again and decide on a colour. Well, we could go back with this colour again. It's got probably just about enough paint there to make it work. And we could certainly have a little bit of a go with it. And notice I'm just going to sort of literally just tap my brush into it and have a little bit of a test with it and see what it does. Yes. You see, we're getting some nice sort of, maybe some very nice distant trees, more stick and twig than there is actual foliage, but you can see you can get some quite nice patterns and shapes. I think I might go with something like this, maybe a touch darker, a little touch more of the white as well, give myself a little bit more paint. And if it gets too dark, you can always dab over it again with a little bit of white just to lighten the whole thing up. So we do want these to look like they've got a little bit of a sticky twiggy look to them. So I'm going to just tap this out on my palette. So there you go, isn't that a lovely disgraceful looking brush? I can't stress this enough that you really just want to take your time with this and just sort of think about placement. Now, my trees have almost completely disappeared there. I can barely see them, but I've got a pretty good idea. I know where the baseline here is. So I'm just going to literally put on where I think the outline of the trees are going to be. Could be one tree just there. And just again, I'm going to just dab these in. I'm not looking for detail. Way too far away in the distance. Row of trees here. As we pass behind our main tree, which is here, these want to look like they're completely disappearing. So if you do this and let your paint run out as you go, that could be a big advantage. Very often when we think we're fixing something, we're actually losing something. We're actually losing something in our painting. It is losing its character. So I urge you to avoid fixing things, especially when you're trying to get these lovely sort of soft, progressive sorts of shapes. The process of tidying up is actually undoing so much lovely work. And look at that, I've got that to disappear way off into the distance here. Though yes, they are all the same sort of shade of purple, which is a little bit sort of not maybe quite what I was hoping for. So what can we do? I can take a tiny drop of black, white with lavender, so I can make myself a sort of slightly just a shade darker, a little bit more to the grey side, but still very definitely purple. Now, again, I'm going to knock most of that paint off my brush. Maybe I do want to just make this one here look a little different. So I'll put a few exploratory dabs, sit back in my chair. I think I'm good. So I'll add a little bit more in there. Yeah, that looks brought it forward a little tiny bit. I don't want to do too much of this. Maybe I'll just add in a little bit more of that dark lavender there. So I've changed my painting just a small amount, but only in this area. Again, we're talking subtleties. We're talking little changes here, not sudden shifts of colour. Into a little bit more detail you can do. You can use the end of your palette knife and down in the shadowy areas, down in the dark here, Bob would say scratch in some little sticks and twigs. Again, you're only really going to see these on these sorts of trees that are fairly close to, back off in the distance. You're not going to see anything there, but you can certainly have a little bit of fun with that. I think it's time we worked on this little field here, and we'll see if we can get a little bit of a snowy impression as well. I've swung my camera around to one side to give you a slightly better view of what I'm doing here. Now, this painting already has a lovely snowy look to it. Liquid white really lends itself to this style of painting, and we can enhance the effect of what looks like a nice field with maybe some grasses on it, with using some cotton buds here, because again that yellow colour that we put on there, that very, very soft yellow tone on there, we can actually remove a little bit of this liquid white here to reveal maybe what looks like some sunlight playing across some snow. So you can just literally take off a little bit of that paint, and you can also just touch into some of this lavender colour here to create some lovely soft shadows at the base of those trees. Now again, don't overdo. We're just going to pick up a little bit of this colour here with a cotton bud. Because remember this, maybe this is a field that's been ploughed. It's got a little bit of texture on it, but we just want the suggestion here, especially in this foreground area, that possibly there is maybe some sort of detail there that we can't see too much of. Remember, as the snow blankets everything, it tends to take away a lot of the detail. So take a little bit of this colour. See, just a hint, just the tiniest hint. And you can also use a cotton bud to add a little touch of paint. So let's pick up a little touch of white. And again, it's not pure clean white colour, but if you want to just put in the indication of a little snow here and there, you can do. So just roll that little brush, a little cotton bud across the surface. Now the idea here is to enhance your painting, not to bury it with paint. So just let a little bit here and there. And there you see, just the suggestion of a little bit of snow. It's good fun. I might do a bit more. How's that? Pretty easy, I think. Next, I want to look at doing my fence. And for that, I'm going to need probably a palette knife, maybe a liner brush. As you see, I've tidied up my palette. Again, another good practice for beginners. Don't get paint everywhere, but just confine yourself to working one area. That way you won't get yourself in a complete pickle. And every once in a while, tidy up your paint. I salvaged what I needed and put it to one side just in case. Now, for my fence posts, I think I need some nice burnt sienna colour. It's a nice brownish tone. Now I can darken that down slightly by using a little bit of lavender. So I could use a nice sort of dark brown tone for a shadow. And I can also add a little bit of white to the other side. So I've got a big range of colours here. So let's blend those two together. You see it makes a nice sort of dark chocolatey purple brown colour. And I could also pull these two colours together to make a sort of lighter side, because remember, these posts are going to have shadow and highlight on them. Let's wipe my knife off, and I think I'm going to start with the darker post first. You see, I'm using just the short edge of my knife here, just picking up a little roll of paint. It's just a little roll. Now, if you really don't get on using palette knives, you can use a brush to do this. Now, these fence posts are closest to us, and they're going to be the darkest ones. I made them look a little darker with my pencil, so you can see that they are going to be slightly stronger, a little bit closer to us. And remember, this is an old fence, an old cherry fence, so they tend to be quite raggedy. Not too neat. Now the gaps, they want to be bigger at this end, and as they start going towards the distance, they start to sort of become a little bit closer together. And the colour starts to also fade out a little bit more. So I'm moving from this darker end, I'm starting to move into more of these sort of lighter brown tones here. So the colour starts to sort of also reduce in strength. Now here's our tree, and beyond our tree I want my fence posts to become paler still. So I'll put in just a couple of quite pale brown ones, and then eventually I'm going to start looking at these sorts of colours here. I want a colour that's almost going to disappear into the background. So again, I'm just going to take a little touch of colour here and just going to put in the suggestion of a fence post here. They literally want to be no more than just like a little hair going off into the distance. I'm just going to use the point of my point of my palette knife here just to literally touch the canvas. And that's all you really need. We tend to want to get, again, a bit too fiddly with these sometimes, and we tend to sort of end up overworking our painting. Now, whilst I've got a little bit of that on my palette knife, I'm going to just slide along. Now, aim for the distance here, folks. Touch and slide your knife along and let it disappear off into the distance. So, see, I started here and let it go towards the distance. And again, if you have to put in a second rail, you can just drop that in and make sure they look like they're converging into the distance. Got to pick up a little bit of that slightly darker brown colour here, and I can see the rails that I drew on here, so I can just touch those in. And again, these are nice old rustic fences. They don't want to be too perfect. They've got some snow on them, so if they've got a few breaks and lumps and bumps in them, well, that's all the better. Okay, I'm going to say I'm not going to get too overly fiddly with these. I don't want to fix something that doesn't need fixing. There we go. Now, do you want to finish this fence going off into the distance here? Do you actually want to have this leaving the painting with a really solid edge? Well, you could do, but sometimes it's nice to have your fences not finishing properly. In the same way I didn't bother finishing the end of that tree particularly, or the end of these trees. This soft edge is called a vignette, and the idea is you want somebody to look here into the centre of your painting, and not having hard edges sometimes can really encourage your eyes to fall in the midline. We'll see what happens with this little hedge here, because that's actually got to be quite a solid shape. But you see how simply I painted my little fence here, and I can put some little bits of snow on here as well. The next feature of my painting is going to be the tree, which is a real focal point. We already know that it falls right on that third line. But just to point out to you what we've been doing here, we've been working from the distance to the foreground, from sky to the distant trees, to that little snowbank, to the fence, to the tree. So we're working successively in layers. It's a process, because most obviously, if I had to put the main tree in, I wouldn't be able to paint the sky behind it. So it's quite logical to work this way. Now, for my tree, I'm going to be using one of these, and this is a liner brush. It's a very nice fine tip, and because it's been sitting in my drawer for a few days, it tends to dry out and go a little bit sort of stiff and bristly. So I like to put out just a couple of drops of linseed oil and just sort of work the bristles through it for a few minutes. So this has been sort of sitting on the side waiting to be used, and you'll find if you have trouble with your liner brushes not quite working so well and not coming to a nice point, try putting a few drops of linseed oil out on your palette and letting your brushes just soak for a couple of minutes. I think you'll find that they tend to work rather nicely. Now, for this tree, I want something a little bit more strong in terms of colour. I'll use some of the burnt sienna and a little touch of black, so a very dark brown colour, but not completely black. I keep a few drops just available in a little jar. I'll take a little drop on the tip of my brush and just work it into my paint. The idea is to make the paint thin, like ink. You should be able to run your brush through it and just twist it to a point. There, nice fine tip. And it's painting with the tip of the brush, which is what I'm going to be telling you next. Hold the brush far back, and you want to use just the very point of the brush to paint. Think of it more like being like a pen nib. And the idea is we want to actually drop in the main trunks of the tree first. We know it's somewhere down in here at the base of these fence posts, and I'm going to paint just with the very, very point of my brush and draw a nice long thin central trunk. There you see the beauty of having soaked my brush with a little bit of linseed oil first. I can do these lovely long thin narrow strokes. Now there is a second tree trunk there just to the right of it, and again just pull up gently and lift off. Think about the tree as being like an arrowhead. All the branches towards the top of the tree tend to stand up slightly, and as the branches become older, they tend to sort of grow more to the side and grow slightly downward. So once again, I go back up the center of my tree trunk, and then at a nice sort of point, I'll kind of come off to the left, and maybe if I come off to the right, and I'm starting to form that little arrowhead here, maybe I'm going a little bit more to the side. And if I do the opposite here, you start to see the shape of an arrowhead. So here we go. Some nice, easy tree shapes. Just think of arrowheads. Now, to give my tree a little bit more sort of bulk, I've got my old fan brush back, the one that I did the background trees with, and a little bit of black and that dark sienna again. A little tiny drop of oil in here, not much, just a little bit. And again, I'm going to use the sides of my brush. Remember, this brush is in a really disgraceful state. And I'm thinking again about the shape of my tree in terms of the sticks and twigs on the ends of the branches. So think about how your tree needs to have a lot of sticks and twigs. You could sit and paint them all, obviously, but that's incredibly time consuming, whereas you can use an old fan brush just to quickly indicate that there is some remains of some old foliage on there, but in actual fact what there is thousands and thousands of little sticks and twigs. Now, don't worry if this gets a little on the heavy side this time. Remember, this is a lot closer to us in the scene, so these can become a little bit sort of heavier and dense, whereas these need to stay very fine and light and thin. Here you see how that arrowhead shape works in our favour. There we go. I don't think I need to do any more to that. I'll see how I feel about it in a minute. But let's put on a few little touches of grass here that, again, sitting down in the snow. So we're just looking for just maybe a few little tips of some snow here and there, or some tips of some nice little brownish grass here covering in the top of our bank. I'm going to put a little bit of Indian yellow and white through here as well. So again, we can be very, very loose with this brush. If you don't have an old worn out fan brush, then do lots of painting and get yourself one, because you'll find that they are some of the most useful brushes you'll ever have, and they're the ones I cherish and keep the most. Let's take another look at our reference photograph, the one that inspired this painting. As you can see, we've managed to move all the way from the distance into the foreground to the edge of this bank, And of course this little trackway with some vegetation running down the centre. Of course this is all going to be snow covered, so really what we have is almost a finished painting. We just need to lay in the suggestion of a little bit of vegetation through here, and possibly even maybe where a track of a cart or something has gone through here and left a little bit of a detailing here on the trackway. So not much more to do. I like to keep this painting really nice and simple so that it's easy to reproduce. For this bank, I'm going to be using a filbert brush. It's a nice soft round brush, not sort of too hard and bristly. And once again, I'm going to be using some titanium white, but I definitely don't want this to be white. You'll notice that apart from just a few hints of whiteness back here, most everything I've done so far is with off-white. And that's for good reason. As soon as you introduce a pure white colour to your painting, then you've run out of your very brightest option. And sometimes it's nice to go back over some of your painting right at the very end and add in a few extra highlights. You saw I took a little tiny touch of Indian yellow there, just a speck, into my white paint to make it sort of almost a creamy colour. It will still look very bright and white on my painting, but it gives it a sense of warmth again. Remember, the light is coming in from high up on this left hand side, so some of this area wants to look like it's sort of almost bright with a little bit of sunshine on it. And I'm just going to touch and grab the little ends of these grasses. Just touch and give them a little flick. And this way you can sort of tidy up the bank as we go. I can just about see the line of the edge of that track or pathway. So I know I'm going to try and go from here down to here at an angle. So this looks like it's sitting up a little bit higher. Here you see, you don't need to do very much to this painting because there's already a lot of white there. A little bit more paint. Again, you see I just lay my brush on its side, I just give it a dab and a pull. Leave a lot of lovely detail in there. You can actually take a little bit of the grassy colour, this brownish tone, and even drag that down into your painting as well for a bit of a shadow. Once again, don't overwork your painting. I might add a few more extra little grassy touches in here and there. Just a few more sticks and twigs, just to give this a little bit more detail. It's that little bit closer to us. On my palette, I've taken some of the burnt sienna, taking a little touch of Indian yellow into this with a touch of white. And again, using that very old scruffy looking fan brush here, I want to add just a little bit more colour to my painting. This brown colour is a little bit flat and uninteresting, so if maybe we introduce a few more sort of light golden touches here, it might make our painting just that little bit more interesting. Probably look a little bit too random. You'll probably want to take a bit more time over this, but I promise you, if you can just let the brush do the work and not stifle it too much, because there's always the chance you'll want to hold the brush too tight, or you'll want to sit there sort of literally watching every tiny brush mark being applied. And I'm going to encourage you, if you can, just relax with your painting and just let the brush do the work. Honestly, you'll find that you paint so much better. Now, while I've got this brush in my hand, through the centre line here, there's that little bit of grassy vegetation. Again, probably well sort of run down by tractors and goodness knows what else, but there just wants to be just the suggestion here. And again, it goes from quite wide here in the foreground and disappears almost completely by the time it's gone too far to the distance here. So, well, a bit off line there. There's one edge of my trackway. So you make sure you're going. I look like I'm dipping down there a little bit. Maybe I'll just get that little bit of an uplift. Once again, it's going away from us, so we don't have to be too worried about being bright coloured. There we are. But definitely you want stronger, darker colours here in the foreground, so it takes your eye to the distance. If you want to go back with your filbert, tiny touch of Indian yellow into the white, and you might want to just give this the illusion of a little bit of sunshine on this pathway. Now, yeah, I probably should have put this in before I did the vegetation, but oh well. You see, you learn to cope. You do things and you paint things and you learn that maybe there is a better order of things, but unless you do these things, you'll never know. Just again, just very loosely, just let that bright snow. And again, you notice I'm also holding a brush on its side. I'm letting the paintbrush do all the work for me, adding lots of lovely detail as I go. Get down from the distance into the foreground without sliding over. And again, I'm just going to drop in the suggestion, maybe a little bit of snow. And here you see I can correct my little deviation there. If I thought it was a little bit offline, I can just paint it out. That's the other thing I want to try and impress upon you as you're maybe beginning out with your painting, is that we're apt to want to try and put ourselves under a tremendous pressure to produce an amazing work of art first time out. And all I want you to do is to learn to enjoy what you're painting without all that pressure. And that's the reason why this painting is one that I think would work well for a beginner, because I think when you're starting out, what you need is what I call an early win. You need a painting that's going to work well for you almost first time out, because it then gives you the sort of basis upon which you can then paint more paintings. And if they don't work out, and trust me, you're going to paint some absolute howlers. I know that because I've already done them. But you'll know that you can come back to this painting and have another painting, almost another easy win that you can do. So you can kind of keep this one almost like a guarantee that if you do a really bad painting anytime in future, you think to yourself, well, I can go and pull out the one that I did first of all, and it'll be this little one, and it'll be your sort of sanctuary, if you like, for artists who are struggling, that you'll always have a nice little painting that you can look back on and say, hey, my first one was great. Go back to basics and have some fun with your paintings and don't stress too much. So what have I got left? Well, I've got this little bit of a kind of a hedge thing on the left here that I'm going to put in, and I'm going to again keep it very, very simple. I'm going to use my disgraceful old fan brush again, and again I just want to sort of indicate that there is some foliage here to close out the side of my painting. With that darker colour over here as well, so you want to get the balance on both sides. So you see my painting progressed rather quickly there. Just these few details in the foreground, a few little sticks and twigs, and some little sticks and twigs here on this hedge. And I kept that corner open to sort of match the other side. So what else could we do to our painting? Well, I mentioned putting in some, maybe the indication of maybe something that's driven through here, but I think I might just overcomplicate things here. So again, I'd rather hold back and not do it. But I definitely think that there could be some snow on our trees. Now, I gave my very old sort of fan brush a bit of a wipe on a paper towel. And I think it's time we should put a little bit of snow on some trees. And for this, we definitely want to use white with a hint of yellow ochre. Sorry, Indian yellow, I'll get it right in a minute. And again, notice how I tap my brush to open up the bristles here. You definitely don't want to go in with a really clogged brush. You want to get this really nice and open and lacy. And I want to just put a little bit of a suggestion of some snow, maybe on those distant trees. Again, just a touch here and there. Again, think about how the light's coming in from this left side. I want to put in some nice sparklers of snow in this tree. I'm having a bit of trouble getting this to stick, and you might find that you actually take off the brown before you actually add any snow to your tree. So here's another example where you want to add maybe a drop, literally a drop of linseed oil to your white with a hint of Indian yellow, and literally one tiny drop will make your paint just that little bit softer. Pour some linseed oil from there too. And that's the beauty of using that little tiny drop of linseed oil, is that it will just lighten your paint up in terms of it's not too thick. It'll be just a little bit softer, and when you touch the canvas you can leave these lovely little flecks of golden snow on your painting. Again, think of the light coming through from the back. So think about maybe the edges being just a little bit brighter. And you can also add some little touches of snow to your bushes as well, just again to lighten them up a little bit. If they've got a little bit heavy looking, just add a little snow. Well, that looks kind of impressive, doesn't it? I'm rather pleased with that. They look like little grasses with little frozen tops. I might do some of that on the other side. Okay, I put out a little bit, a tiny bit of fresh white, pull it down flat, get the palette knife in, then just pick up a little roll of paint. If you think the big side's going to work for you better, then use that side, or use the little side, whichever you fancy. And just on top of some of these rails, put in a little suggestion of some snow. Super fine down there, so we're not really going to be worrying too much. There we go. I think that's it. I rather like my little painting. I think it's got a lot of fun details to it. Or if you want to put some long frosty grasses on there, you can do just the edge of the knife. Again, you can use just tiny little bits of paint and add some nice little frosty edges and things in here, especially in the shadowy areas, by the way. If you haven't got some sticks and twigs, you can scratch those in too. But add all these little details in, spend a good few minutes adding them, because people love to see these sorts of details in a painting. And as I often say, spending maybe a few minutes adding these little grassy details, little touches of colour here and there, it's what elevates your painting. It's what makes your painting stand out as being that little bit better, maybe, than someone else's work. People might look at your painting and go, my goodness, look at all of that lovely detail they've filled in to their painting. And literally it'll be this sort of thing done at the last second. Just adding little sticks and twigs and little bits of frozen grass here in the foreground. Look at that, all that lovely, amazing detail there, just done very quickly in the last few moments of my painting. Now, as I've mentioned a few times, this painting, I hope, will become, for new artists or even experienced artists, something of a constant in your painting hobby and career, if you're going to be painting for years to come, and I hope you do, that this little painting, this little scene will become a template, for you to reproduce in a different season, that you will paint this again, maybe with some spring colours, some lovely bright greens, maybe the first hint of some flowers here on the bank, that you'll change the sky for a sunrise or a sunset, you'll put in some hills, maybe a distant mountain. This little painting will give you everything you need for a quick win to start with, and for many more paintings hereafter. So there we have it, a simple template of a painting you can do time and again. So when I stand back and look at my painting, there's something immediately obvious which to my eye needs attention. Can you see that my painting looks like it's one of two completely different subjects? The top half is all in mauves, and this bottom section is all in these lovely gold colours. And again, this is something beginners need to take care of, is to have some harmony between background and foreground, to share some colours. And this pale gold colour in the sky here just isn't enough compared to what's happening here in the foreground. And I'm just going to use my filbert brush. I'm going to take some of the lavender colour. You remember I kept some of that. And I'm going to take a little of this lavender colour, which is the base colour from back there, and I'm going to add it in a few subtle spots here on my painting. You don't have to add much. Just a few sort of subtle touches here and there in your painting, in the odd shadow. And you'll see suddenly how these two halves of my painting become much more combined. And I'm literally going to put some of this in just in some of the darker shadowy areas. Just touch it in, and it's quite miraculous how just taking just a few touches of this colour here and there into the shadows really will help combine the painting. It's almost a bit like a little bit of a miracle happening. I'll spend a few minutes just touching in some of this lavender colour, and then we'll come back and see what it looks like, and I'll do a before and after shot for you. Okay folks, that subtle blend of colours has taken place. I just introduced just the tiniest amounts of that lavender colour in the foreground, and in the interest of balance I added just the tiniest bit of this orangey colour to my background, and I think this brings my painting together nicely. So that really is it for the end of this painting. So there you have it. A perfect painting for a beginner to have in the bank, a guaranteed winner. And you definitely need those early wins when you're starting out. But don't have to use my photographs or my paintings. Pick one of your own and turn it into your own templated painting. Now, don't move. There's some more lovely beginner paintings coming right along. Happy painting, people, and happy 2025.